And then at the end of my talk, I will disappear, and you don't have to look at me talking at you anymore. You'll be able to look at beautiful pictures of the library and some of the books. And then at the end of my talk, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll come back to you and it will be a bit more personal that way. So everybody cross your fingers, hope that the screen sharing works appropriately. Julia, can you, because I can see you, can you give me a thumbs up? Do you have the, excellent. Okay, here we are at the scene that we all know very, very well. The cathedral. I'll just see if I can get this. Hang on. Right, okay. I think we're working now. For those of you that are not very familiar with where the library is, the only place you can see the library from outside is actually if you're standing in the cloister, because the library is on top of the east range of the cloister. I've put my laser pointer on. Julia, if I look at you, thumbs up. Can you see the, excellent, you can see the laser pointer. Here is the library. It's a very, very hidden space. It's above the east range of the cloister, and you can only see the library, as I said, if you're standing in the cloister. To get to the library, you start off in the south transept. This is what I like to refer to as the secret door. Here's the secret door to the library just before you go out. Now, as some of you may realize, this photograph of the library door was taken a few months ago before the COVID pandemic. Because if you were to visit the south transept now, you would see it set up as a vaccination center. So we're going to go past all of the vaccination booths and go up through the door, up the staircase and into the library. So here's the door in the south transept leading to the staircase. It's 37 steps up. Please take care on the stairs and no pushing. I'm always telling people not to push on the stairs. Here's the second door to the library. We've climbed the steps. We've arrived at the library. And I'll just get my keys out. You can catch your breath. And here we are. We can step out into the library. Again, this photograph was taken before the COVID outbreak. Things have been moved around a little. Before the present lockdown, when we were sort of in between lockdowns, the library was open mainly to staff and volunteers. We had to move things around a little bit to work with the social distancing, but this is what the library looks like in normal times. Here we are looking north in the library. You can see the door and the staircase to the right of the picture. In case you're wondering what the gray things are on the chest in the front of the photograph, those are the cushions, some of the book supports that we use for looking at the historic books. So if we turn and look south in the library, I'll just give you a little bit of history. The library was built in 1445, and it was originally twice as long as it is today. If you cast your mind back to the second photograph that I showed you, actually I might be able to show it to you. There we go. There's the second photograph. The library now extends about half the length of the cloister. Originally, it was it went the full length of the cloister. But in the 18th century, it was reduced to the present size. King Henry VI gave timber from the royal forests for the building of the original bookcases. Now, those original 15th century bookcases are long gone. And the bookcases that you see before you today are modern ones. They were built in 1980 by the Works Department here at the Cathedral. And they used timber from elm trees that had formerly grown in the close. I'm told that the elm trees were called the Waterloo elms, but they had to come down because of the threat of Dutch elm disease. And this is what was done with the timber after it was felled. Let's go through the gate and walk down the library. Now, if we were visiting in real life, we wouldn't be going past the gate. Going past the gate is only something that staff are allowed to do. So here's another advantage of visiting via Zoom. And just another photograph of one of the bookcases and some of the books. The bookcases are very, very tall. What you can't tell from this Zoom presentation is that I am not very tall. So I spend a great deal of my time on a ladder. It always seems to be that the books I need to get to are always at the top of the bookcase, so I spend a lot of time on the ladder. And here I am, indeed, on the ladder. Towards the south end of the library are two workstations that have been set up for the library preservation volunteers, where they clean and measure the books and they record the condition. The volunteers are not working at present during the pandemic, and I will be very pleased to see them when they come back. Here is Dawn Wilson. She's one of our wonderful preservation volunteers. She's cleaning the exterior of a book here. And here she is cleaning the interior of a book. And here is another one of our volunteers, or the hands of another one of our volunteers, measuring a book and recording its measurement and its condition. If you note carefully, you'll see that she's using a pencil, and that's because no pens are allowed in the library. So that was our whirlwind tour of the library as a physical space. What I'd like to do for the remainder of the talk is to share with you some of the great strengths of the collection that's in the library. One of the questions I'm frequently asked is, what's in the library? And the short answer is a lot of books. But the less flippant, more serious answer is that the library contains a world-class collection of medieval manuscripts and early printed books. We have about 225 manuscript books. And when I say manuscript, what I mean is handwritten books that predate the invention of the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg, working in Mainz in Germany, invented the printing press as we know it today in the 1450s. So the manuscript books that we have date mostly between the 10th century and the 15th century. Of these 225 manuscript books, the most important, as far as the cathedral is concerned, are the 60 or so manuscripts that were made in the late 11th and the early 12th centuries at the cathedral's previous site at Old Sarum. I think these are really important manuscript books. They are some of the only things that we have that came to the present cathedral from Old Sarum. So if you think that in 2020, just last year, we celebrated the 800th anniversary of the founding of the present cathedral, the books that came down from the Old Sarum site are some of the only things that we still have from the previous site. In addition to the manuscripts that were made at Old Sarum and the other manuscript books in the library, we also have about 12,000 printed books. Most of the printed books were printed before 1800. But we also have considerable numbers of books from the 19th and 20th centuries. And we also have a reference collection of modern books, modern books, modern pamphlets, and articles relating to the collection here at the cathedral, but relating to the cathedral, its history, its collections, relating to the city of Salisbury, the diocese and liturgy, etc. And if I can just mention here that anyone can come to use the reference collection, at least in normal times, they can come in and use the reference collection. But we also make our manuscripts and the early printed books available to anyone who has a genuine need to consult them. I've been cataloging and working with the library collections for just over 3 years now, and I've learned some of the strengths of the collection. And for much of the rest of the talk I'm going to give to you, I'm going to show you some of the strengths of the library collection. So not talking necessarily about particular items, but really rather as particular items as representative of some of the great strengths of our collection. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the manuscripts from Old Sarum. Actually, if I just go back one. So the strengths I'm going to share with you today are the Old Sarum manuscripts, our collection of 16th century theology books, most of which are in their original bindings. I'm going to share our collection of 17th century science books, again, most of which are in their original bindings. And I'm also going to show you an example of our collection of Greek and Latin classics. Again, most of them are in their original bindings. Now, I might sound like a broken record. You'll notice that I've talked about most of the books being in their original bindings. And this is another one of the strengths of our collection, that most of what we have on our shelves is in a historic binding. So people who come to look at our collection aren't just interested in the text that the books contain, but they're actually interested in the physical item. We have a fantastic collection for the history of book bindings. Okay, let's look first of all at our manuscripts from Old Sarum. As I said a moment ago, these manuscripts are especially precious because they're some of the only objects that we have that are still in our possession that were brought from Old Sarum to the present site. A scriptorium, that's a workshop in which scribes copied manuscripts. A scriptorium seems to have been established very soon after the foundation of the cathedral at Old Sarum. And in the scriptorium, the canons copied a superb collection of works by the Latin fathers. The collection is very, very scholarly. Now, the manuscripts appear to have been copied very quickly and relatively cheaply. And if you think about it, the manuscripts were being copied, were being produced at a time when the original cathedral was under construction, and the diocese was being organized at the same time. Money was probably quite tight. Here's the first book we're going to look at. It's a collection, it's manuscript 128, in case you're wondering. It's a collection of works by St. Augustine of Hippo. It's in a 19th century binding, but the book itself, manuscript itself, was written in the last quarter of the 11th century. Now, I mentioned that the books, for the most part, that were copied at Old Sarum, appear to have been copied very quickly and relatively cheaply. And they used quite poor quality parchment. Parchment, in case you're wondering, is the skin, is animal skin, usually from sheep or from a calf, which is chemically treated in such a way as to produce a whitish, a very durable whitish material that is very long lasting and is fabulous for writing on. But you can see down here, there are some holes in the parchment. These were probably the result of the sheep. Actually, no, it's a calf, because this is probably calf skin. Probably having been bitten by an insect. The quality of the parchment is pretty low. Here you see the edge of the parchment. This hasn't been cut this way. This is actually part of the sort of the original outline of the animal. It wasn't they didn't cut it down to be a nice square shape. It's a not very expensive piece of parchment. I'm showing you this page because the scribe that copied it out was clearly having a bad day. You can see here that it is full of errors. There's correction here. You can see something added here. This bit in the margin here is because the scribe left a few words out as he was copying, and he simply put the words that he left out in the margin, in the same way that that we do today. If you think back to your school days and you were copying something out, it's really common to leave something, to sort of skip over something and then sort of put it in the margin. Here's a close-up of some of these errors. This is the bit that needs to be added, the bit that was left out originally. You can see the scribes put a little symbol here, and that's because he's showing that that's where it's been left out. So scribes of the 12th century, just like anybody else, could have a bad day. The manuscripts from Old Sarum are quite plain for the most part. If any of you have seen beautifully illuminated manuscripts in the British Library or anywhere else, well, we don't have manuscripts that look like that. Ours are practical working books that were designed to be used as opposed to being designed to be shown off. You can see here, capital letter A, it's in black ink. It's, again, quite plain, not much color being used. Turn a few pages over though. One scribe has finished here and a second scribe has taken up the pen, so to speak. Different handwriting. And you can see that scribe number 2 here is a bit more decorative. Now, whether this decorative initial here was done by the scribe himself or by somebody else, it's not really possible to tell. But if we just turn the page over, you can see a little bit of color. It's not bright red, but it is a red ink and a decorated initial here, a little bit more decorative than the previous page. Here it is in close up. It's a capital D, in case you're wondering, at the beginning of the word domino. The next group of books I'd like to show you an example of is our collection of 16th century theological books. We have a fantastic collection of these, and as I said earlier, most of them are in their original bindings. Now, we have these books thanks to the generosity of Edmund Guest. Edmund Guest was a scholar of King's College, Cambridge. He became Bishop of Rochester, and then he was Bishop of Salisbury from 1571 until his death in 1577. He amassed an exceptionally large collection of theological works, both on both sides of the doctrinal debate, so Catholic works and Protestant works, and he bequeathed this collection to the cathedral upon his death. We know that we have in the library, we've identified 1,205 separate items bound in 684 volumes that have come to us through Guest's request. There may be more, but those are the ones that we are certain about. So of these 684 volumes, we're going to look at one of them. And here it is. It's quite a small work. This is about 6.5 inches high, and it contains two texts, two works by the most famous Protestant reformer, by the works by the man who you could say is the author of the Reformation, by Martin Luther. The first work in the book is his commentaries on Psalms 51 and 130, and the second text, which is bound with the first, is his commentaries on the Magnificat, or the Song of Mary, and the Benedictus Dominus Deus Israel, or the Song of Zechariah. So here's the title page of the first work in this volume. Just a bit of a digression here. It was very common for books to be bound together in early modern times. Books were for the most part bought unbound, and you would take them to a binder and have them bound. And it's quite cost effective. You have two small books, you might have them bound together and save yourself a fair bit of money. So here's the title page, and you can see books by the early 16th century do have recognizable title pages. They don't in the 15th century largely, but here they do. You can see here we've got the title, we've got Martin Luther's name, it's in Latin, and we can see here the printer's device and the date of printing in Roman numerals. It's 1539. What we don't know is where it was, what it doesn't tell us here on the title page is where it was printed or by whom, unless you just happen to know off the top of your head whose printer's device that is. You have to turn to the back of the book, what's called the colophon. This is the colophon here. Colophon is telling us that it was printed in Argentorati, which is the Latin name for Strasbourg. It was printed by Cratonum Maelium, by Crato Maelius, or his German name is Kraftmüller, and it was printed in May 1539. on the nones of May. Now the nones of May is not actually the 9th of May, but according to the Roman calendar, it's the 5th of May. So this is the Roman calendar that has the Ides, beware the Ides of March. We just had the Ides of March, by the way. And here's one of the pages of the book, and I just photographed this page because of the decorated capital letter E here. So we saw some decorated initials in the 11th century manuscript, but the decorated initials is a big deal actually in early books, and it continues even when books get printed. Here's the second work in the book, Martin Luther's commentaries on the Magnificat and the Benedictus, and it was printed again. You can see here the Latin name for Strasbourg, and it was printed in 1526. And there's this beautiful woodcut border. Again, if you want to find out who printed it, you've got to turn to the colophon at the back, and it says here that it was printed in Strasbourg by Johannes Hervagius, or in German, Johann Hervagen, in March 1526. Now, the right-hand side of the photograph has something interesting, and we'll just look at it. Here it is a better photograph of it. You might wonder what it is, and it's a fragment of a medieval manuscript. It's a fragment of a 14th or 15th century English liturgical calendar. Bits of old manuscript were very commonly reused by binders in the 16th century. It was very economical. It's really see it as 16th century recycling. And you get the same thing. This is the front cover. We're just looking at the back cover before, inside the back cover. This is inside the front cover. Again, it's another leaf from a 14th or 15th century English liturgical calendar. I got quite excited about this when I saw it for the first time. And I spent a fair bit of time working out what month it must have been, looking at the saints' days who are celebrated in it. And then I see that a previous librarian, probably Christopher Wordsworth, had already identified it as August. I'd come up with the same conclusion, and then I see that somebody else has had already done it. Just another look at the binding. It's a very pretty little binding. It was probably bound in Cambridge, in case you're wondering. And these little marks here, it's not damage to the book. The book originally had little pairs of ties that would have held it closed. And those are just the remains of the ties that are there. Something else that's interesting about the book is this is the part of the book that we call the forage, or fore-edge, like forehead, but it's fore-edge. And it shows the title here and the press mark. But this is actually the way that books were shelved in the 16th century. And for the most part, most libraries, they were shelved like this until the end of the 17th century. We think they were shelved like this until the 18th century in the Cathedral Library. And so the titles were actually written on the forage rather than on the spine as they are today. Moving along through the centuries, perhaps the most unexpected strength of the collection is our collection of 17th century science books. These are witness to the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Most visitors to the library are quite surprised when I tell them that we have such a wonderful collection of scientific books. We have these books. They were bequeathed to us because they were bequeathed to the cathedral by Seth Ward. Seth Ward was a mathematician. He was an astronomer. He was the Bishop of Salisbury from 1667, just after the restoration of the monarchy, 1667, until his death in 1689. Now, Ward was one of the founder members of the Royal Society. And he was also the Savilian Professor of Astronomy at the University of Oxford between the years 1649 to 1660, where he expounded the theory of planetary motion. And we're going to look, the book I'm going to show you is one of his books on astronomy. Doesn't look like much from the outside. It's in a really typical 17th century binding, but it's one of the most famous astronomical books ever printed. It's called the Astronomia Instaurata, and what it is the a later edition of Copernicus, Nicolae Copernicus, the famous book De Revolutionibus Orbium Caelestum, on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. Copernicus, the first edition of Copernicus's work was published just before his death in 1543. This copy was printed in Amsterdam. You can see Amsterdam, that's the Latin for Amsterdam, by Wilhelm Janssen in 1617. I'll just show you a few images from it. Here is the famous image of the Copernican system, showing the sun at the center, around which orbit the planets. We've got Mercury, Venus, Earth with the moon, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the final orbit, excuse me, is that of the fixed stars that were believed to orbit the sun. Here's another one of the many astronomical diagrams. It shows the Earth's rotation around the sun and how the angle of the Earth gives us the 4 seasons. Here are some mathematical diagrams. Now, I am not an expert. I'm not a mathematician, and I'm not an expert in the history of science. If anything, I'm an expert in the history of the book. But my daughter, who and my husband, both of whom are scientists, got quite excited about these and proceeded to tell me what they were. But I'm afraid I don't really remember. So we'll just quickly gloss over those. Please don't ask me questions about the mathematical diagrams. What I am going to show you, though, is the back cover of the book, the lower board of the book. And I want to draw your attention to this little hole in the book here. This is not willful or accidental damage to the book. This is actually evidence that the books were chained to the shelf. We know that the library here at the cathedral was a chained library. If you've ever been to Hereford Cathedral or Wells Cathedral Library or to Wimborne Minster, they have a chained library. This library was also chained. The books were fastened to the shelves or to rods that ran along the front of the shelves by a metal chain. The ring went through the book, and then the chain was attached to that. Here are our collection. Here is our collection of book chains. They're probably late medieval or early modern. They're actually behind my desk. So there's a picture of me looking very stern. I like to use this photograph as evidence that I am chained to my desk. I'm such a hard-working librarian, chained to my desk. We think that the chains were taken off the books in the 18th century when the library underwent some fairly substantial modifications when it was cut down in size. Now, the last group of books that I want to share with you, again, these great strengths of our collection, are our Greek and Latin classics. And our collection of these classics has come to us through a number of different donors and sources. And we're going to look at one of the many books that were bequeathed to the cathedral in 1837 by the Reverend Herbert Hawes, who was rector of St. Edmund's in Salisbury. Some of the books that he bequeathed to us appear to have been his school books, and some were clearly used when he was a scholar at Oriel College in Oxford. He's just one of many who have bequeathed their Latin books of Latin or Greek literature history to us. So here we are. Again, I'm just showing you what it looks like on the outside, and this is what it looks like on the inside. It's a collection of the Roman poets Catullus, Tibullus, and Propertius. I chose this because I am a great fan of the Roman poet Catullus. I really like his poetry. We've moved into the 18th century here. This was printed in Cambridge at the academic press, at the Cambridge University Press, and it was printed in 1702. So we've just moved into the 18th century here. It's quite a pretty book. It's got a very nice engraved, added engraved title page. It's very 18th century in what it looks like here. And I've just photographed one of the pages. I love this poem by Catullus. It's about the death of a sparrow, not just any sparrow, but the sparrow that was the pet of his girlfriend, Lesbia. This is actually one of the first poems that I ever read and properly understood in my time studying Latin. So I think that's possibly why I'm so fond of it. It is quite delightful. I just wanted, again, one of the things that I've tried to show you, give you glimpses of in this talk, are what the books look like and some of the decorative things. So we looked at some of the manuscript, the decorated initials in the manuscript. We looked at woodcut border and a decorated initial in Edmund Guest's copy of Martin Luther's writings. Showed you some of the illustrations, the diagrams from Copernicus. But here we just have these pretty decorative bits. This is called a tailpiece. It's just something that was put when the text didn't fill the page. Here's just the book plate showing us that it came from the Reverend Herbert Hawes, who lived on Ralston Street. It's quite an academic book. It has various things, what you might call of academic apparatus. It gives variant readings. It provides sort of academic notes and lists of sources. So there we go. Thank you very much for joining me on this whirlwind tour of the library and some of the books on the shelf. So to find out what lies beyond the library door. Just a few words of credits here. Most of the photographs were taken by me. Some of them were taken by my daughter, who's taken a typical teenager. She took a selfie of us, of the two of us here. Others were taken by the professional Ash Mills. Now, in case you're wondering, health and safety notice here, Sibylla and I are not wearing masks because we live in the same household. So I'm just going to pause here. And just before we go to taking some questions, I just thought I would elucidate a little bit of what I actually do in the library, because it's perhaps not quite so clear. It's not a lending library. So what do I do? Well, I sort of divide my time between four areas. One is collection care. Working with Emily Naish, the Cathedral archivist, I try to ensure that the books and other objects in the library are kept in the best condition to ensure their long-term safety. So we look at the environment, the condition of the book. We have preservation volunteers who are cleaning the books. Looking at temperature, humidity, things like that. Although we're not a lending library, we are in normal times open to researchers. I spend a fair bit of my time supporting researchers who come to look at the manuscripts, to look at the printed books, and I also answer inquiries about the manuscripts and the printed books. So I do need to be able to read the Latin, and I do need to be able to read the medieval handwriting. I do a fair amount of outreach and promotion, so I give talks like the one I suppose I'm doing now. In normal times, we have the occasional discovery day, we have school visits, we have all sorts of visits to the library. But I spend perhaps the greatest amount of my time, the activity that takes most of my time is cataloguing. The Beyond the Library Door project really has as its goal to increase knowledge of and access to the collection. And really the best way to do that is through a modern online catalogue, which is done to modern professional standards. And that's where I spend the great majority of my time. And before I hand over to you and your questions, I actually want to give you a huge heartfelt thanks. The Beyond the Library Door project, which is what brought me to working at the Cathedral, is funded by external funders, largely by the Heritage Lottery. But one of the funding groups that has been very generous is actually the Friends of Salisbury Cathedral. So thank you very much for contributing to the work that I do here at the Cathedral. I think we will, Julia, if you think that's okay, I think we've got a good 15 minutes. We can go through some questions. Do you want me to start with the questions that are already in the chat?
Yeah, that'd be good. If you want to start with them and perhaps go through them in order from the top.
Okay.
So
so hello, Julia from Trisha. So, and also hello. I looking through the faces, I do recognize a number of you. Okay, Heather has asked, where did the stairs outside the door to the library go up to? They go up to the edge of the south transept, actually. If you were to carry on the staircase past the library, you would go up to the Triforium Gallery, and you keep going all the way up, and you would emerge just as if you were going up. If you were going on a tower tour, you'd go up first of all to the top of the nave. The staircase here goes up the top of the transept and comes out above the vaulting. Here's from Susan and Paul. March, July, October, May. The nones are on the 7th day. And then, but there's also, yes, I do remember that actually. And there's a bit more. There's a bit more of that. But yes, I have a very handy handbook about dating that tells me when the nones and the ides. The calends are easy. The calends is just simply the 1st of the month. Does anybody else, just looking through the pictures, raise your hand or wave wildly if you can remember any more of the rhyme about remembering when the nones is? Doesn't look as if it's a very well-known. There we go. Never mind.
Well, that's me. I raised it and I can't remember the rest quite, but a bit about the ides follows, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, because some months they're on one day, and there's a small number of months where they're on another day. I can never remember. I have to look. Confession time. I have to look them up.
I didn't know I could remember that. I must have learned it at least
I'm impressed.
Years ago. And when you said the nones are on the 5th of May, I thought, hang on a minute.
Yeah, there are some months that they fall on a different day. Do we do all the repairs and restoration of books in-house, or are there still specialist bookbinders? We do no repairs, or what you might call a restoration in-house. We clean the books in-house, and anything that requires the attention of a conservator, we have done by a professional conservator. I like to say that we have a tame conservator. It's the same firm that also oversees Magna Carta and how the condition of Magna Carta. So so that's what we do. And the answer to the second half of that, are there still specialist bookbinders? Specialist bookbinders in terms of those who specialize in the care of historic books probably go under the name of conservators now. But oh yes. And there are different conservators. There are conservators who tend to work with flat paper or flat documents, paper or parchment. And then there would be conservators who would specialize in bound material. Trisha has asked if I can explain why the library was reduced in size. I can. The cathedral seems to have a bit of form in this area, actually. When the library was built in the 15th century on top of the cloister, it was built on the cloister that the cloister, when it was built, had never been designed to take the additional weight of an upper level. Does this sound familiar to any of you? Does it remind you of the spire? Again, the spire was built on top of a cathedral that had never been built to take that extra weight. Well, the cloister had not been built to take the weight of the upper level. And by the 18th century, it was suffering under the strain. And one of the stonemasons took me outside and showed me, if you go into the cloisters, if you go along the range where the east range, I suppose, where the chapter house is, If you have a look, you can see little sort of rectangular shaped holes cut into the stone, and that was where wooden bracing was abutted into the cloisters to help bolster it, help support the weight, to keep it from buckling under the additional weight. In the 18th century, oh, there's also there is a picture. There is a picture of the cathedral. It's in the museum. It's a large print, and it just shows it's a view of the cathedral showing the cloister and showing the east side, and you can see the library extending the full length of the cloister. I can't remember the date of it, but the library was reduced in half, and the ceiling was lowered slightly. Now we think actually that's probably when the book chains were taken off, because obviously they would have had to empty the library at that stage, and that would have been the most logical time to take the books off the shelf, remove the chains, and then turn them round and place them on the shelf in the way that they are now. I'm moving along. Do people come from far and wide to consult the books? Yes, they do. Just thinking, we've had somebody come from Poland, well, I say recently. Obviously, we haven't had very many people come in the last 12 months. But prior to that, I'm just thinking of someone who came from Poland, somebody from British Columbia in Canada. Yes, people do come. We have unique items. Obviously, all of the manuscripts are unique. That is the nature of a manuscript. But some of our early printed books are the only known copy of that particular book, or someone comes because they're doing a critical edition of a text and they want to look at all surviving copies, or they're particularly interested in the provenance, where a particular book came from, who owned it. And again, there are some binding specialists that come because we have some fairly unusual survivals of binding. Back to Tricia. Tricia Carr, do we have any written information about William Marshall? Off the top of my head, I don't know, but actually you could have a look yourself. You could have a look in the online catalogue. The online catalogue is available through the Cathedral website. So if you go to the Cathedral's homepage and you click on the tab that says Magna Carta and Collections, it's not the most obvious, but you can follow the links from there to the library catalogue, and you can see what's been catalogued so far, see whether anything that has to do with William Marshall has yet been catalogued. The catalogue contains not just library material, but also archive material.
Thank you. But it's just because I was very privileged to actually see the only existing copy in the world at the Piers Morgan Library in New York of his biography. Mm-hmm. I just wondered if I just suddenly thought I wondered if there was anything else around, but I shall do that.
Well, have a look. Have a look on the online catalogue. And does the library still possess at the Cathedral any manuscripts of Cicero, Horace, or Plautus? I'm just trying to think. We do have one of the, yes, we do have manuscripts of classical writers. I'm just trying to think. One of the some of the manuscripts that were some of the manuscripts that were copied at Old Sarum are of classical texts. The Old Sarum manuscripts are not just writings of the Christian fathers, although that is predominantly what they are. There are more than one or two. There is a small number of classical authors as well. Now, when you say manuscripts of Cicero, Horace, or Plautus, in terms of antique, as in classical copies, those are very rare indeed, and most of the earliest, not necessarily, I'm not talking about the cathedral's holdings here, but in general, most of the earliest manuscripts of classical writers are actually Carolingian copies. And when the humanists of the 16th century, who made a big deal actually about returning to classical learning, the copies of manuscripts that they were looking at were actually Carolingian. They thought they were classical, but actually Renaissance humanists, the manuscripts that they were reading were themselves Carolingian. And then I have I'm just jumping on to the next question here. How do we clean the books? Do we treat the leather bindings at all? The books are cleaned inside and out using specialist equipment and techniques. So we have museum vacuum cleaners that have a very low suction that can be used if the book is in good enough condition to be used with that. It has a very soft brush attachment. We also use, we also clean them with brushes. We have a brush for the outside, and the brush for the outside is pony hair. And we also use a brush on the inside first few leaves and last few leaves. And that's boar's bristle. It's again, it's reasonably soft. And do we treat the leather bindings at all? That's a very controversial topic, the treatment of leather bindings. For about the past at least 25 years, the general feeling is that it is better not to apply leather dressing, leather bindings. Prior to that, certainly up until the late 1980s, I think it was quite common to put treatments on the leather itself. In the same way that you might polish, like put leather treatment on your shoes or your handbags or your leather luggage or whatever to treat and feed the leather. The general view now from conservators is that can generally lead to more harm than any beneficial capacity there. That's quite our policy following that of the British Library, the Bodleian Library and Cambridge University Library is not to put leather treatments on. But it is, I'll just to make you aware, that is actually quite a controversial, people get quite heated about that.
The thing I ask is, back in the 1960s, I worked for my godmother, and she had a very valuable collection of books, and she used the British Museum recipe, which involved applying potassium lactate, I think, to dry everything out and clean it, and then applying lanolin with your finger. So you ended up with the most wonderful soft hands.
Yes, beautiful for your hands. Whereas I have the opposite problem with my hands, because in order to handle the books, we don't wear gloves. That's another question I get asked a lot, is about the use of white cotton gloves. You will see people handling books with white cotton gloves on the television, but actually it's not considered good practice, because gloves are a very good way of transferring dirt from one surface to another. But also, if you've ever tried, has anyone tried to read a book wearing gloves? Raise your hand if you have. I have. It's not very successful. It's very difficult to turn the pages, and you can cause a lot more damage to a book by wearing cotton gloves than you would cause by not wearing cotton gloves. So instead of gloves, the whole thing is to have clean, dry hands. And anyone that's coming to look at the books here, I will send off and ask them to wash their hands and dry them very thoroughly. And then very often I have to send them back again to wash their hands, because they have automatically, on the way out of the washrooms, put hand sanitizer on. So I have to send them back to wash the hand sanitizer off, because hand sanitizer is deadly to leather volumes. It's deadly to a lot of things, actually. So if you're a violinist or you play a musical instrument, wash your hands and get the hand sanitizer off. So that just picks up another thing. But yes, so by the end of the day, I've washed my hands so many times. I love putting hand cream on at the end, but unfortunately, I can't put it on to handle the books.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. But it is, it's those are interesting questions. Were the books, moving along? Now this is a brilliant question. Were the books copied or old Sarum borrowed from elsewhere? Yes, they were. In the Middle Ages, generally speaking, people didn't write out a manuscript sort of from their head. You borrowed a manuscript and you copied it. So the scribes who were writing the manuscripts are not the authors of the texts. They are copying the text, and they would borrow a copy. Now the Old Sarum books, I've done quite a lot of work on this. The Old Sarum books, for the most part, were borrowed from houses from not monastic, tended to be from houses of canons on the continent from France. Seems to be a very strong connection with the scholastic tradition, as in scholasticism, and Old Sarum. So you would borrow a book. Seems also that the scribes here were under a lot of time pressure to get the books copied and returned to whoever that had loaned them in the first place. So yes, they were copied from borrowed books. They were copied in haste. Books seem to have been continental. The Old Sarum copies of some of these texts are the earliest known copies of these texts in the British Isles. So they're quite significant from that. And do we have any ancient music manuscript? We don't have many. We have, I'm just thinking of 2 late 14th, early 15th century manuscripts that have a fair amount of music in them. They've just been digitized and will be available for anyone to look at through the Digital Internet Archive of Medieval Music at the University of Oxford. And then I think perhaps, as we are running out of time, the ideal question, the perfect question to answer at the end is, are we running out of space? Yes and no. Largely, the library is quite full. There is some space, not a lot, and that does have a bearing on our current acquisitions policy. So I think in the past, things were donated to the cathedral and the cathedral said, thank you very much, and somehow found space for them. Now, if things are offered to the cathedral, they need to fit very clearly into our collections, into our acquisitions policy. And one of those things is, do we have space on the shelf for it? So yes, we do have space, but yes, I would say largely we are running out of space. And I think we are largely running out. I think we've come around to our full hour. I know that was a whirlwind tour. I tried to pack in as much as possible because that's what I like to do, really. But I think we're all getting pretty fed up with staying at home, aren't we?
Yes.
So I tried to liven up your afternoon.
Thank you very much, Anne, on behalf of all of us. That was a really fascinating talk. So thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining. And yes, hope to see you all soon in reality.